Hey, good afternoon. It is the day after Absolute Idiot Prank Day. And, man, this year I had great expectations because everyone's been building up for the last few years. And nope, it was stupid shit. Like some fake Estonian company backed by Mercedes buying Mazda. Like if any company other than
Damn,
like if
I
any
think I only
company
saw
other than
one thing,
Toyota bought Mazda, see that's why that's the thing. There was nothing good out there. Like
and I wasn't like looking for anything. I was actively trying to avoid like getting duped, and I think I only saw one thing that was even attempting to like be an April Fool's prank, but it was so obvious where
yeah,
I don't know if people are really maybe they took this year off or maybe it's kind of dead, but
I think I think
I'd be
what's
fine if it went away forever.
I think what's happened is people are starting to realize that attempts at anything that results in somebody else suffering isn't fucking funny. And almost all of the things that happen on April Fools have some kind of really widespread impact. Like, it's one thing to have like a localized prank that you play on your friend where it's like, ha ha, gotcha. But it's another thing when somebody publishes some shit that has, broad economic impact over like, a foreign company and all of their employees. Like, okay, right. But we didn't see any of that. Like even in like the consumer outlet cover journals that I pay attention to, there wasn't any real attempt to make any kind of funny vapor product or make fun of anything really. I think you're right. They just took the year off or something.
Yeah, and maybe it's also everything's been done to a certain degree, and if it's just not, the real world is parody enough. You have the richest man on paper who's wealthy on inflated stock prices, destroying a company to inflate his ego. Like, what else could you mock about that? You know what I mean? Like,
Well, and then the giant open letter to
oh
regulate
yeah,
AI. Like,
yeah,
come on, that
exactly.
ship
It's
has
shit like that.
sailed. That ship sailed like a decade ago.
I don't know about that. I don't know if you saw they banned it in Italy.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it'll broken
it's not. It's
clocks.
not. It's not gonna be something where uh when somebody's like, "Oh, that Pandora's box can't be closed." Like, I don't know about that in terms of like as well. You don't know how much of the interact or of the use is like faked, and
Yeah,
they
but
did the same shit with crypto. And you have a lot of people who are invested in the
so
notion of
is
AI.
Italy gonna like reject electricity generated by fusion plants that are being run by AI?
That's not gonna happen.
They're not gonna reject
No,
it, or
no, no company's gonna let a fucking fusion plant be run by AI.
that's how
No
they.
fucking
But
way.
that's how they were able to get the magnetic coupling thing to work. They used an AI
No,
to use
it's
an
not.
I mean, it's
It's not
algorithmic
gonna be.
intelligence. It's not Chat
Yes,
GPT.
exactly,
But
exactly. It's not like the same way they're not letting Watson fucking do surgeries on people. Like it's not. It's just not. No company is going to get an insurance claim or get an insurance coverage that is going to allow them to use complete artificial intelligence to regulate some anything. It's just not going to happen. It's there's always and in fact, you can look at um, the automotive industry for an example. People will unionize around protecting. The same shit happened with fucking drones. Like the whole
yeah,
reason there are drone pilots is because actual pilots fucking basically formed and said this is going to destroy all these jobs and that's on the government if that happens. So all the air, like the unmanned drones, they could be automated, but they have to have drone pilots because legislation forced as such. And it's like every drone has to have a like FAA approved pilot in control of it. And that's where it wasn't because they needed it. It's because anytime there's the possibility of AI, nobody's going to allow AI to completely take over
No,
anything where there's like massive decisions that need to be made. It's just not going to
it's
happen.
true. Even our Mars robots run off of giant instruction sets and are piloted.
8-minute delay.
Yeah, an 8-minute delay between actions, but and that's actually really fast now. It used to be 20 minutes, but
and it's like the rovers have automated.
They have programs that they run.
Yeah, and they have the capacity to do it, but it's just too important of a decision to let completely be automated. So that's why it's just never like it's possible, but it's just not going to happen in terms of like humans are too distrustful of technology inherently for 100% of the people involved in anything to take that position, which is why it's just not going to happen. So that's where I'm like, I'm completely aware that it's possible. It's just not feasible because of human nature. And that's ultimately like we've hit the wall and we're seeing the backlash against it in terms of like, fuck, man, when this was like driving spikes in railroads, they had the same backlash. If you're talking about important decision making, like they're definitely not gonna give that shit over to a robot. In terms of there is this promise and this potential, but then there's the reality in terms of like human context is always what's important, and that's the one thing that algorithms can't do. Is put things into human context. And it's like, so for example, if they have to do a controlled meltdown of a nuclear power plant for some reason because there's like
because the magnetocoupling fails.
No.
Oh,
because there's
like
a natural disaster or something. And there's like a let's say there's like a natural disaster that they know if they don't do a controlled meltdown, then that natural disaster will make that whole region contaminated. So in that case, it would be almost, unless they pre-program this specific scenario beforehand, you wouldn't be able to get an algorithmic intelligence to allow you to do a controlled meltdown because it doesn't know this natural disaster is going to destroy the plant in a way that's going to make everything way worse, instead of a controlled meltdown, which isolates the problem to a very relatively small area. And that's where you could try to come up with every single scenario, but there's going to be one in which not having complete control and then having to fight that thing for control under an unknown variable's closing window is why no one would ever put something like the nuclear launch codes or some shit. It's never going to be automated because that would be too risky if they weren't able to undo it under a condition. And it's like certain things, even down to like driving a vehicle. So many people are not comfortable giving over control of the vehicle to algorithmic intelligence or artificial intelligence.
A lot of people are uncomfortable giving control of the vehicle over to another person.
Right. Yeah. And that's where it's just, there are too many of those people in the general population and in like in any given organization, there's not going to be 100% of people that trust AI, even in AI organizations. And that's where, like, one of the reasons, I think it's Timroot Jabrani, I think that's her name, or maybe Timrit. She was like uh, the ethics, I don't want to say designer, but she was like head of ethics at Google. And when she left, it was over the AI threat, in terms of it's never going to be 100% accurate. So if the societal like blind spots are where the algorithm is inaccurate, then it creates a huge problem in terms of just adopting society's prejudices and blind spots into how the algorithm works. Because then if you go talk to ChatGPT about like communism and capitalism and imperialism, there are blind spots in there in terms of how it represents those things. And it is very propagandistic and Western oriented. So the notion of AI having people who trust it 100% within an organization, even like I said, even the ones that build it don't trust it 100%. So in terms of how it's being oversold in terms of how it's going to be adopted in society, the same way that they oversold blockchain and cryptocurrency at the very beginning. And I see it, which is why I'm like, I'm not buying what they're selling. And further, what they're selling is going to create so much more of a backlash because they're overhyping and overselling it, that it's definitely not going to get to that level. In the same way that people actively ignored and turned their backs on cryptocurrency at first because so many people were proselytizing about, oh, this is the next big thing. If you don't get, this is the next Facebook, this is the next Google. If you don't get in Bitcoin, you're going to get left behind. And people did not respond well to that shit. And there's going to be a ton of people who don't respond well to how AI is being pitched in the same way that, like, when automated train spike were presented, or the train spike press or whatever, they created whole fucking lore about people who would kill themselves instead of let a machine take their job. It's like, that's fucking stupid. That's fucking dumb. That's really, really fucking stupid. It's not admirable. It's not noble. John Henry was a fucking idiot. He's a tool of the machine. He's a tool of propaganda. And it's like, all that said, people are going to react that way because they're raised on this fucking stupid propaganda too. So we can't act like we don't have a bunch of over propagandized people willing to kill themselves for the American machine, in terms of like,
did Paul Bunyan ever have to go up against an axe swinging machine?
Oh man,
would Paul Bunyan, would he have lost to the machine too? Probably, but would the stories
and Johnny
reflect
Appleseed would have lost to
at big agriculture? Actually, there may be a version of Johnny Appleseed that found a motorcycle and has like an Appleseed gang, and they just roll around the country just spreading apple seeds. But that's like a super weird biker fantasy at that point. But they're relying on the machine at that point. They're relying on the underground machine. Yeah, so the machine still wins. Let's see, what other heroes of Americana eventually lose to the machine?
I mean, fucking Neo.
Dr. Quinn, medicine woman, eventually loses to the machine.
People still don't want to accept that Neo lost to the machines, and it's not really a loss. It's like an
He's
acceptance that we're codependent.
yeah, and
So
he's
it's like in
their existence is bound on this integration with the machine.
so in both of ours, and that's
Yeah.
where the acceptance of the codependence is what the machines don't want to accept in the same way that the humans don't want to accept it, and that's why so many people fight it, which is also where accepting it is how you rise above it, metaphorically and in the actual context of the film, so to speak. And it's like uh the way that it's presented is kind of backstory, but the whole Niobe Io
Sati thing.
Act 2, well, it's yeah, exactly. It's like it's hidden in Act 2, but that's the real focus of the whole uh universe's narrative. It's accepting this codependence and then moving forward, understanding that codependence and how to best not antagonize each other when you're codependent. And that's like what a lot of people don't like, because they need antagonizing of codependence to feel good or move forward in their lives. And a lot of it's not even just like romantic relationships, but like working relationships. If like a boss is not able to sort of antagonize the subordinates, in a lot of cases they don't get the result that they think that they want. Well, they definitely want that result, but that's the one they think they need, because they don't know any other way besides antagonizing their subordinates. And that's like, you know, that specific codependent antagonization is like it's across so many social relationships, but too many people in America specifically abuse it, which is why they didn't like the Matrix films, because it's like it's all about finding codependencies and then not antagonizing the people who are codependent or making them feel like they're subordinate.
Man, think that
You know,
the relationship should be that people who are in some kind of managerial position would encourage an environment, foster an environment where people can be more productive, and people in the subordinate role would challenge people in a management role to be better managers. That's how it's supposed to work, because then we all end up becoming better people within a role in that machine. We all become more refined cogs in the machine. We might even be able to graduate to becoming integrated circuits.
This is where Emile Durkheim's theory of division of labor, it was meant for the manager to, as you're saying, make a person who is being managed more efficient and effective in a way that if they did not manage themselves, they would not be that effective. And you can see this is where, like, in physical labor, for example, taking breaks and making sure people take breaks is like, if they can't manage their time, then they'll take too many breaks or not enough breaks. And that's where it's the manager's position to know what's the best amount of breaks for a specific individual, because everybody doesn't have the same motivation scale either. And that's where some people may be better with more breaks and some people may be better with fewer breaks. But then the notion of seeing other people taking more breaks, you also have to balance that fairness. So the whole management is meant to be a check and balance on individuals so they don't either burn themselves out or not be motivated enough. And that's where, in theory, it works out great. But then you see not all managers, if not most managers, not acting in this manner. And they use it as a way to sort of feel authority and feel power over people instead of actively trying to make those people more effective. And when you encounter a good manager, they stand out because it's like, oh, this person's not trying to just abuse the employees in some way. They're actually trying to motivate them. And then that person stands out when in fact that's what all managers should just be doing. Like that's the whole reason for managers in theory. So we've really like management is not a vestigial artifact of society so much as most managers never operate the way they're supposed to. And if they did, that position would be useful. But it's just the fact that a lot of the, like I said, a lot of them just aren't operating in the theoretical. This goes for a lot of positions in society where there's people meant to do certain things, but when they actually operate, they just don't do what they're supposed to. And by proxy, other things start to domino effect into not being what they're supposed to. And that's where like government is one of those big dominoes where they're supposed to be protecting us as individuals, but when they declare corporations as people, then they're legally allowed to protect the corporation as much as the individual now. So it's like the theory, which full circle, the theory of AI versus the reality of how it's going to play out is like, we've all seen this movie before in terms of something being overpromised as a new technology. And then when it actually plays out in application, it ends up being not necessarily a dud, but not the thing that they were claiming it was going to do. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just amused by the idea of a movie about that's all hype, where everyone's waiting to get this thing in the mail, and finally the day comes where everyone's package arrives, and they all open it up. Inside of it, there's a little box, and they open the box, and inside it, there's another tiny box, and then they open that again. There's a little coin, and it says "Thank you." And that's it.
Oh, so you inadvertently have you ever seen the movie Biodome?
Yeah.
So when I saw that, the theater was empty. It was like maybe 5 people, and they were all the friend group that I went with. We were like teenagers at the time. Little did we know that was based on a real life event that had happened basically before we were all born. And or in our early consciousness, so we wouldn't have really known that it was real.
In the time before memory.
Yes, in the time before memory. But when they did this project, it's the same fucking technology pitch where they're like, biodomes are going to be the revolutionary thing that get rid of the ozone layer holes, because it was the ozone layer hole lexicon at the time, in terms of them not understanding that the problems were codependent in terms of how the ecosphere worked in the geosphere. It's really crazy to see not that long ago how limited society's vision was. And they thought these biodomes were going to work out. Well, it turns out isolating people together is not a good idea in almost any circumstance unless they've gone through the fucking NASA program which ensures that those people can be isolated and not go crazy. So when they did the original biodomes, people were just like doing all kinds of insane shit. So it didn't work out. Like regular people wouldn't be able to stay in isolated
Oh
environments
no.
unless they went through strict psychological testing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
That's like
it's a matter of, it's yet another form, like the way the technology was proposed, and then the way that when encountered with regular humans, it just had a complete different impact than anybody thought. It's gonna, I mean, we already see the same shit happening with AI in terms of like, um, people don't like when they find out AI made something and it was presented as if it was made by a human. Some people, oh, this is cool, this is amazing. Yeah, that's the exception and not the general population. And it's those same bros that were like pitching crypto and were into Bitcoin because you see the overlap in the profiles in terms of like anybody that's really, really super impressed by AI in any form is usually like still a Bitcoin maximalist or an Ethereum maximalist or some shit where you're like, give it up, bro. Like that ship has sailed, fucking got hit an iceberg and is at the bottom of the ocean. Give that shit up. And those people won't let it go because they get so emotionally invested in some shit that they don't technically understand that, again, they become the super visible evangelist that you can't get away from, that eventually people start moving away from.
yeah.
And it's like the same fucking like it's the same Bitcoin people. Not all of them, but in general, like 95% overlap in terms of the people who were promising Bitcoin was going to be the next big thing and also saying it was going to happen in the next 5 years, like fucking dummies. Those people overlap. Like AI, the adoption curve is faster than any tech that has been released before. And the way that that was being presented is as if that's a good thing. And it's like all of the metrics that they were putting against have all these super negative effects and negative impacts in terms of like Facebook, the way it's destroyed social relationships, not because of social media, but because of the way its algorithm operates. And then YouTube has like destroyed a whole generation of minds in terms of like, not because they're watching media, but the media that's been presented is like fucking Jake Paul and Logan Paul aimed at kids, just basically rotting their brains. And that's where I'm like, it's not the fact that these things exist, it's the way that they're being deployed and the effects that they don't see coming is also where I'm like, then it's not all gonna be fucking roses. So when the real negative impacts come, holy shit, what's that gonna be? So that's where we're at the stage of AI where it's all like, turn your selfie into something that looks like it was done by a real artist because you're too cheap to actually pay a real artist to do a rendition of you that you will like because your taste isn't wide enough to actually appreciate anything. And you just actually want to see yourself phase of AI. And that's like really short novel window. And it's almost already gone away. Like the people who were doing the, I don't even remember the name of the app, but they were like taking their pictures and being like, "Oh, this is what I would be if I was cyberpunk, or if I was a wizard, or if I was a fairy, or some shit." That window's almost closed in terms of the novelty because everybody's done it. Like if you start doing that shit, okay, grandma, like the person who's doing that shit 6 months later after the trend has basically come and gone. It looks passe in a way that you have to do something else now to catch people's attention because everybody did that. Take my selfie and turn it into like 15 different uninspired images just of me and
Yeah,
not
it's
even
like a
include
cosplay
anything else.
generator.
It is. It is. They don't have the creativity or interest and attention enough to actually cosplay anything. So yeah, it's like I'm gonna do this cosplay generator to imagine what if I was like bold enough to cosplay, and nothing against it. It's just that shit is like nobody's doing it anymore because those novelty narcissist embellishments only have short shelf lives.
So
And
Guinness and I, we built a rat rod like over a decade ago, and we put images of it into an AI generator and gave it prompts like Mad Max or Cyberpunk or Blade Runner, and it took our steampunk themed rat rod and gave it a bunch of different treatments, and the best that they came up with, we did one that was Akira themed, and that was actually pretty cool, but the best that it came up with was an abstraction, and it didn't actually, a lot of these things had features that are impossible, just completely like floating shit. and some of the lines were cool, but none of them would have actually been able to be built. Not with like our hands or with the processes that we were familiar with at the time that we were building the vehicle. And that was about it. That was like the deepest I ever went into AI generation. And it was cool. It looked neat. It looked like the kind of thing I expected in some kind of CGI anime. That it had those kinds of lines.
but then if you look at it too close and it starts to look like
Oh, it looked so fucked up, man. Like, I'm serious. Like a wheel floating in a place that there's couldn't be there. And then things that just were things that were already exaggerated being even more exaggerated. Doors that don't shut, door panels or body panels that don't actually mate to anything. That's like the weird part. It was a lot more like a collage of polygons than an actual like rendering of a vehicle. Really complex polygons. I mean, enough to be kind of photorealistic. I'm talking like the best CGI realism, but still fake like anime. And so it's I guess it's I'm just describing abstract shit now, but that's the thing is it when prompted it made cool looking stuff, but I didn't keep any of it. It wasn't cool enough that I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna share this stuff. It was like, oh, this is novel. Next. I think the dilemma that I have as having created something and then created a photograph of it and then pumped it into the machine is that at a point, like how much of me is even a part of this process? When I can just as easily grab a pencil and paper and start drawing a vehicle. I can draw hundreds of impossible vehicles that I could never build. Thousands. I can draw spaceships. Might take me a while, I guess. I might not have the zoomability or accuracy or clean lines of the computer. I could draw it and render it in a computer and have those clean lines and manipulate it in a space or relative space. That just takes a lot of time. I haven't seen any AI generators that allow me to manipulate an object in 3D space, though, so maybe that's like asking a bit right now. That's some Tony Stark level technology, right? Jarvis,
Which
draw me an object and render it in my glasses so that I can manipulate it with my free hands.
and I think, you know, there's only a few people, well, a few occupations that would really need that, and engineering is one of them.
Yeah.
So if you're building cars, yeah, that would be fucking awesome. But in reality, like,
I don't need that shit. Straight
you
up.
don't need it.
I don't
You don't
fucking
really
need it.
need it. It would be cool,
Be cool to
but
have
it would
it, but
almost be like um lateral movement in terms of if you're building something for the sake of like experimentation and you build it all in that three-dimensional space, then you'd have to redo it in the real world when you could have just done it in the real world in the first place.
yeah.
So it's like it feels cooler because like it's an opportunity, an option that by proxy of existing feels like, oh, this extra layer of
It's abstraction.
virtual space. It's abstraction into virtual space. It feels meta, but it's useless meta. So meta information really has to have a use for it to be lasting instead of just novel. And that's where there was like a novelty in taking pictures of the rat rod and turning it into different looks, but after a while that novelty went away. And
After
the fucking
like half an hour, not even half an hour, like 20 minutes. That's actually a really interesting point. Like, I've gone through, you know, I can't even count how many amplifiers, guitar amplifiers I've had, or effects pedals I've had, or types of variations of specific guitar effects within that, like, effect pedal ecosystem. And at some point, it's they do the same thing. A lot of these things do the same thing, and so it's really just like a personal, like, it's like a vanity project, I guess, to explore these different options when really they're all, a hammer is a hammer for the most part. And there are specialized hammers, but when we're talking claw hammers, they're pretty much the same. I think that that's what's going on with a lot of computer stuff, software, social media, is there are a lot of iterations of the same thing that are happening all simultaneously, and they all want to be able to kind of interact with each other, and they all want to express some kind of unique feature that gives the audience a reason to tune in. And, Facebook is a nightmare, and YouTube is all commercials now, and Twitter still has some utility, but it seems to be getting fucked more and more every day. Every day I read something weird about Twitter. Like, after their code was released to to a repository, then they decided to announce that it's now open source. And they fired up all their engineers, and man. And like, Facebook has really, they put like the biggest ball and chain anchor spike in the ground, however you want to describe it, to VR.
oh man,
I think they may have signed.
they killed
like,
it.
Oh, I didn't want to
So
say
this
that,
this
though.
is one thing I have. I mean, they killed the industry. They didn't kill VR. So this is one thing I have very strong feelings about, because I was into VR in 2018, like, heavily. And before they took it over, it was a very promising space. And it was like game design was headed in a direction where I'm like, it was looking to the point where we were gonna be in like Ready Player One. And then fucking Facebook bought Oculus and everything started sucking. And I don't mean like Oh, just in general. I mean, like all the design just like stopped being cool in ways where you're like, it's like they stopped trying. And it's almost like they'd get to this point where the design was good enough to appear as if they had put time and effort into it, but in reality, the potential use of the platform had just stopped being explored. And I'm sure there's like niche games that got released after 2020 that were good, but generally everything that was produced in the space after Facebook took over was like just fucking horrible. And I've never seen what looked like such a promising growth in a resurgence of an industry in terms of like when VR tried to happen the first time, it was premature. The second time, still premature. This time, the technology was there, but the game development was like lagging in a way where it just needed to catch up. And it's like I I thought the development was going to catch up until Facebook took over, and it was just it's really tragic in terms of people getting turned off to the technology because of Facebook's poor management of resources within that industry. Is like I've never liked capitalism, but the promise of it is just not real. And all like whether it's Google or Amazon or Facebook, anytime a company that's successful in one area starts to expand in another one, they start making poor decisions about that area in which they're expanding and ultimately end up killing that thing. And that's where I don't mean the whole thing, but the industry around it. And that's where there was a point where there might have been VR arcades popularized in a way that arcades were happening in the 1980s, or and not to say that COVID wouldn't have killed it or made it way more difficult to sustain as well, but Facebook did that on its own, and there was no real culture that grew around VR. Like VR chat was that pre-existed them. That still exists. And it's way better than anything that they've built individually. But seeing that, I'm looking at Elon Musk and what he's done to the companies after he's like
Fixed them.
he what at whatever point he hit critical mass and was no longer able to sustain his positive impact on companies that he acquired. Now his acquisition makes things start to turn negative, and it's like there's a ceiling for everyone. And it's not to say that people can't have failures. Even Beyonce has a failure on her record now with the Ivy Park shit, where the thing that they did with her clothing line, it seems like it makes sense on paper, but clearly it didn't, because it didn't work. And every brand has a point of saturation in which anything more gets added to it is not going to be as successful as all the previous shit, just by proxy of people being tired of that brand. Same shit's happened with like the Paul brothers. So it can literally happen to any brand, and it's knowing when to pull back on saturation that I think allows brands to persist. Like Eddie Murphy, I think he's like a great example. Um, there's not too many that know when to pull back. But especially corporations, they have a hard time ceding ground to other corporations because it's always about growth. Um, but I feel like Starbucks grew too quick, too fast, and that's one of the first big corporations that had to start ceding ground to make sure that they survive in terms of like you can't be competing if there's only Starbucks left and then you're competing with your other Starbucks locations, which they were, then it's only actually detrimental to the organization in the long run, even though in the short term it looks good on profit margins for the corporate stock, but for the individual locations, it's not sustainable. Um, and I don't know how many people remember when there was like a Starbucks on every corner, and then a Starbucks in Target, and then a Starbucks fucking pop-up stand in Kroger, and there's a point where they hit such a saturation that people just started getting sick of seeing Starbucks and wanted something else. And they had their fucking regulars, of course. But that culture of infinite growth, I feel like Starbucks was like one of the first to actually hit that wall and have to start downsizing. McDonald's organizations definitely hit it too.
Isn't Starbucks under fire for like union busting?
Oh yeah. They've always been anti-union and in a way where
I think there's like I read something about Bernie Sanders going off on the CEO of Starbucks about like a list of labor violations.
Well, they're terrible, man. Their insurance is a joke. I mean, it may have gotten better, but it's one of those things where it's like the appearance of compliance, but they skirt every fucking law they can. So if you're like a full timer there, you're actually working 32 hours, and they do as much as they possibly can to keep you away from 40 hours so they don't have to pay you overtime. And then if they have like I said, I don't know if they probably, it's probably worse now, but if they had like a staff shortage and then you end up having to work overtime, they would make it in a way where you're like a clopener. So you leave at like sometimes 1 a.m. and have to be back at like 5 a.m. Let me repeat that. You'd have to leave at like 1 a.m. and be back at like 5 a.m. And it's like, it sounds impossible for somebody to like be put in that situation, but they did it so frequently that there's a term for it in terms of like a clopener and like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. A clopener is somebody who would like leave at like 1 a.m. and be back at like 5 a.m.
Okay, so
think about that, man. Think about that. I would have nightmares that I was at work and have to like go back and work. There were times I would like sleep in my car in my clothes and go back to work.
So
I would sleep at in a friend's driveway because it was closer. Like I lived at 56th and Fall Creek, and the Starbucks I worked at was at 86th and Ditch. I would drive to like 71st and Allisonville and sleep in my friend's driveway in my car instead of driving all the way home because it was too much of a waste of time.
So they've been I think just this year they've been issued the NLRB has issued over a dozen complaints against Starbucks, covering over 200 unfair labor practices.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. Well, and they did this shit where they make it seem like they're selling you their stock as an employee at a discount, but you can only actually access the stock if you stay there for 5 years, but you're buying stock the entire time. So they were basically inflating their stock purchases through any employee that didn't work there for 5 years, which is a lot.
So if you don't last, if someone went 4 years and 364 days, and they wouldn't gain access to their stock.
Nope.
Oh,
nope.
Wow. And then so the company just absorbed Starbucks. They wouldn't. Yep. Oh man.
I don't know how much stock that, it was like right on the cusp because I worked there for like 4 years.
Oh man.
That's same shit with Best Buy.
That's dirty.
Same shit with Best Buy, man. And it's like you see these companies doing this stuff and you can't really discern how much of their stock value is this type of like, how do I put it? It's a deceptive practice that makes people working there think that this little piddly stock that they're buying is going to actually be worth anything at any point. But across a bunch of different locations on the stock market, it makes an impact. And, it's not necessarily a huge impact, but it's definitely not negligible. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. And the whole thing is, if they really wanted it to be about just work, they'd give you that fucking stock from day one. But the fact that they put it at like a 5-year point, they know their fucking turnover rates. They know that their turnover rates are probably like 4 years at the max for 95% of their people. So really only 5% of the people are taking advantage of that fucking 5-year stock thing. And those people probably have other jobs anyway. And that's where, oh my God. So find out at the Starbucks I was working at in Bloomington, the motherfucker that was getting the stock, like because he was staying there and had the time, not the only one, but one of the motherfuckers that was able to be there long enough to get the stock because he had another job, also putting cameras in the bathrooms. So it's like, I remember when the fucking police came in and arrested that motherfucker that day, but it's like, there's only so many people who can actually take advantage of that type of caveat. And some of those people are like already wealthy or already in a position, not necessarily like wealthy, are in a position where they don't need it. So then they do it to abuse full circle. It's like that management authority thing where they can just go in and abuse these situations because they don't actually need to be there. And so that, like, seeing that play out where a significant portion of the people that worked at Starbucks when I was there had college degrees, like undergrad degrees, and needed the money. And then the people that didn't need the money were there for fun because it was like a way to meet people. It's like that type of job in society is not beneficial to anybody at the end of the day. And we've gotten to a point where this gets back to that fucking John Henry idiot that's willing to be underemployed and let the management do whatever, and like, as long as you got a job, then just be thankful type crowd. And it's that type of propaganda that allows Starbucks to exist because they have too many fucking labor violations consistently to still be existing. in theory, you would think.
And it's over coffee too.
Well, and they were doing this whole thing where they were trying to make it seem like they were about fair trade, um, and people were questioning why their coffee was so expensive. Fair trade was being used as a major excuse, and then in the process, you find out a very limited selection of their beans is actually fair trade. And when they're not paying their workers fair wages, like what the fuck does that fair trade coffee even mean then? Because there's no way that their worker wages have kept up with the cost of living. Um, and to that point, it was like, oh god, they had tips, and then they would split the tips up evenly among the people that worked there, even though it was really like the morning crews and the afternoon rushes that got the like most tips. And that was like one of the most frustrating things to see in terms of like, it's not fair to the people that had to deal. Oh my God. I can't tell you how many rushes would be when there are lines of people out the door and they're all irritated because they haven't had their coffee yet. It's fucking dark. The sun hasn't even come up. And you have to deal with these fucking rude people. And then the tip jar gets full and then it gets split evenly with the people who don't have to deal with that shit. It was so infuriating in terms of like, you didn't have a choice. And then the wages were so low that it's like you really kind of depended on the tips to be like this supplemental income in terms of, because you didn't have to report it. It's like, it's supposed to be a little boost or a little, when they give you a little stupid fucking Starbucks bag full of the shit that you earned and had to split with other people. It's like, it's capitalism doing communism. And it's fucked up that capitalism gets to do communism inside of it in little organizations and then union bust and then make communism look bad. Because when you do communism poorly within a capitalist system, you get to say that's communism. But in reality, it's the limitation of capitalism doing communist drag. And that's where, like, if there was enough money to go around, splitting it evenly is great in theory. But when the people who are lining up out the door are also under tipping because they think everybody else is going to tip, there's not even really enough to go around. So then when you have to split it evenly among the people who don't really do anything, it's more akin to the fucking group project in private school where the fucking rich kid skates on the poor, like the poor kids who were there on the fucking scholarship in the group. They do the work because they have to make sure they don't lose their scholarship. Meanwhile, the poor kid or the rich kid skates by on their fucking work. And then it looks like everybody should get even fucking distribution, when in reality, the people who do most of the work in that specific scenario should get most of the reward. But then because of the poor execution, people will be like, oh, that's communism because everything was split evenly, even amongst the people who didn't earn or actually work. But in reality, that's a failure of capitalism to adequately reward people in the first place. So it's like, it's really hard to exist in a place where underemployment is protected by the worker, and the right to repair is rejected by the consumer because they are so inundated with corporate propaganda that they would rather have a Genius bar to feel elite than be able to actually fix their Apple products. It's really fucking weird. And, you know, it's definitely unsustainable in terms of like that type of deference to corporatocracy as a culture. Idiocracy is effectively about that specific thing.
I watched Idiocracy recently.
Yeah.
That
I haven't watched it recently.
I mean, by
but
recently, I mean
forgotten.
within the last like 3 months, I've watched that movie. At least I put it on in the background. I forgot how terrible it was.
Well, and it's not.
And it's not that it's
just,
terrible. It's actually really well done, but it's like a horror story.
It's a cringe fest in
Oh
terms
man,
of
it's like the worst.
when they
it's a super
drop the
allegory.
F-bombs. The F-bombs are like, oh shit. Oh my god. Oh fuck. I forgot people used to do that. It's very jarring because nobody does that shit anymore.
Oh man.
And I don't even mean in like they definitely do it on the cesspool corners of the internet. But what I mean is people don't do it in quote unquote comedy for laughs anymore.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with like, oh, this is a good subject. It seems like parody in its early stages was actually cringe because people don't know what parody was meant to be. And I don't mean in like the Mel Brooks days. Like that's when parody was actually parody.
Yeah, I was gonna say like Mel Brooks
like,
is like pretty legit parody.
No, that's absolutely perfect parody. Or like Leslie Nielsen, Naked Gun. That's like perfect parody.
Yeah, like Police
But
Squad.
everything after that,
so good.
Everything after that is like this parody attempt that's really cringe. But because they didn't know what was like, Mel Brooks is a genius, obviously. But when you don't understand what Mel Brooks is doing to make something paradise something else, you can do a lot of shit that's not going to be parody in attempt to do that. And that's where you get the like, well, let me make one addendum. Keenan Ivory Wayans obviously gets parody. And with the Scary Movie series, like when he was in control of it, it was clear parody. And there's a point where he loses control and it becomes cringe. And Hollywood starts doing this like superhero movie, romantic comedy movie where they start parodying things, but it's really just like, it's cringe copying and it's not funny. And that's where the cringe about it, if you look at it as cringe, the reason I'm calling stuff cringe is that emerged as a category of like television. What was it? No, Seinfeld's part of it, but My So-Called Life is like the original cringe TV show that started like people don't like Jared Leto basically being himself on MTV. This was when like cringe and then Freaks and Geeks like really cemented it. And like Seinfeld definitely had cringe elements, but Seinfeld was like it defined itself by being nothing, and that was unique at the time in terms of like the Nothing show. Even doing a whole episode about it in itself becoming one of the first meta commentaries on itself, or of a show doing meta on itself. But there's this like
Larry David gets parody. He understands
oh
parody.
for sure.
He's-
but then Curb Your Enthusiasm isn't, it's like it's satire of the Nothing,
yeah.
which is like a whole different step. So this is where like
Well, yeah. Sarcasm
the
doesn't always become satire, but satire
Right.
is almost always has elements of sarcasm in it.
yeah.
And sarcasm isn't always cynical, but cynicism almost always is laced with some sarcasm and some satire. I think a lot of what we get doesn't even rise to the level of sarcasm. It's just cringe.
Yeah, because then you get, okay, so like Weird Al Yankovic, or Vic
Yankovic
is
yeah.
clearly parody, but when you get a bunch of people trying to copy him, they didn't reach the level, and it just becomes cringe because they're not funny. They don't understand what he was doing to make things funny when they were done in the first place. And so it was like anything that was trying to be Weird Al became cringe by proxy because it didn't achieve the level of comedy. And it's not even just funny, but the level of wit to achieve being parody. And things that are witty don't necessarily have to be laugh out loud funny. But it has to be either witty or funny, I think, to achieve parody. And like a lot of those films didn't have either one, where the first like 2 or 3 Scary Movies had that witticism and they were funny, but then like the rest of them didn't have any of it and it was just stupid. Like they were trying to be, they thought being stupid was what parody was. And so when those people who were trying to mimic parody,
Wow, they made 5 of those movies?
yeah. And at some point, yeah, I think it's this third one, they took the control away from Keenan. So it's like at a certain point, they just drop off in quality. It's just like a complete drop off in quality because no longer the Wayans brothers are involved in it. And that's where, or involved in the,
Yeah, he was involved in the
the
first
creation.
2. And then Scary
yeah.
Movie 3 and 4 were directed by David Zucker, and 5 was Malcolm D. Lee. Eric Gold produced the first 2. And then after that, it's David Zucker is pretty much instrumental. And Robert Weiss are instrumental afterwards. Wow, the screenwriters. There was 6 screenwriters for the first movie, 7 for the second movie, and then there are only 7 writers between the 3, 4, and 5. And one of them is on the writing team for all 3 of the ones without Keenan. Yeah, it's basically not Scary Movie afterwards. It's just a franchise.
Yeah, they basically hollowed out the franchise and tried to serve it to people as if it's the same thing. And nobody liked that. You think AI is going to be able to take that shit over? And not you, but I mean in terms of like, Hollywood is not the only one, but anytime a franchise or something gets created, capitalism will try to hollow it out and sell a cheaper version of it at the same price, at the same cost, if not mark it up, because now they know people like that thing. Like, same shit happened with fucking Dragon Ball Super, man. Some of the animations in that shit are fucking horrible because they're like, oh, people will watch the whole thing anyway, even if we cut corners on a few animations here and there. And god damn it, they cut those corners and people still fucking ate that shit up. So there's this element of like, once people get so invested in something, capitalism's like, oh, you're invested? Good. We can start cutting corners. We can start putting shitty ingredients. We can start adding unnecessary ingredients. Corn syrup, it's in there. Fucking, and
like, hey,
ultimately,
hey guys, I got this chemical. We got to add it. What does it do? I don't know, but it causes cancer.
Somebody's paying me to add it. We're gonna do it.
It's like,
I don't fucking care.
Are you sure? Yeah, man, it causes cancer. Of course, we're gonna put it in the product.
We're not gonna give it to our kids.
Oh, God, that's like, that's just me being cynical. Actually,
no, it's just being real. That's. You think the motherfuckers at Kellogg feed their kids that cereal?
No
fucking way, man.
They know what's in it.
No fucking way. Hell no. So over and over, you see these examples of people who are like, "Oh, I don't let my kids use iPad, even though I'm fucking Steve Jobs. I don't let my kids on Facebook, even though I'm Mark Zuckerberg." You know, over and over across every goddamn industry, these motherfuckers will sell this shit to our kids and not give it to their kids, knowing it's fucking giving everybody cancer. And in the process, it's like, there's this angle of capitalism making it seem like it's better to start doing that exploitation than to keep giving people the quality of the thing that brought them there in the first place, instead of trying to cut corners and trying to appease that shareholder. But I mean, we've been calling for a while now in terms of like the big nothing hitting and that contraction eventually happening. It's happening now. And that you can't do that shit forever. So I was never of the mind that it was sustainable. To me, it was like, is this going to go on for fucking 30 more years? Is it going to go on for 50 more years? Am I going to, like, in my lifetime, am I going to see the end of this cycle? And for a while, it didn't seem like it, but now it seems like it's more inevitable than not that the cycle of that is going to end. And that's where, because of the inherent rejection of AI that's happening in a significant part of the population, I'm looking at what happens after capitalism dies as being like more of a reversion to like the physical, with the understanding that we have a dependence on the digital at certain points. Instead of, for like the last 30 years, we've been told and we've been promised that we should make everything and put everything in the digital world. And the digital world will eventually be real enough that we can not be able to know the difference between our physical world and the digital. No, that's not going to fucking happen. So next best thing is that the digital world is enjoyable enough to spend a significant amount of time in it. Well, not VR, but apparently people want to spend time arguing on the fucking internet. And that's what that digital space is mostly being used for, in terms of like, it's like porn, animal pictures, animal videos, and fucking arguing. So that's what that digital space is really for. And yeah, there's prospects of like theme parks and all this other digital shit that you can just go do in the physical world, or play a video game. So because video games already exist.
I have hardware that models analog circuitry for good processing guitars. And I've owned plenty of analog circuit tube amplifiers and solid state circuit analog hardware amplifiers and all this stuff. And I've been playing these things for years and years and years. And I really like the way modeling software works and the hardware that runs it, because at a certain point when I'm playing through it, at least now that it's decades into the development and refinement of this kind of technology, these tools are a reasonable, if not uncanny valley version of reality. The way they respond, the sounds that come out of them, the utility they provide, the fact that a single box can now function like an entire collection worth of equipment. Like, that stuff's pretty spectacular, but at no point do I ever cross through the abstraction layer and believe that I'm in Studio A of illustrious big room studio in LA or something, or New York or Chicago. I don't get that sensation. I've listened to impulse responses of fancy rooms and halls and arenas and all these kinds of things, and listen to audio that goes through that. And sure, it sounds cool, but to me, it always sounds like an effect, no matter what. Even with monitoring headphones or like a binaural setup where it's designed just to feed into the ears and try to fool you that way. Remove your environment and just listen to the sound of the headphones. And I think the real dilemma with those things is that when I move my head, the sound moves with me. And even if I'm in a room with fantastic monitoring, the room itself doesn't really sound the way that it does in the mix position once you start moving around. And so even the best approximations are just, it's like a picture. It might be moving. It's a motion picture, but it's going to be really hard, I think, to get that kind of like spatialization with sound and just the feeling of being in a space. Because the feeling of being in a space exists even if you can't hear anything. Your body responds to these things. I think it'll be really fantastic if that barrier can be crossed. Like,
yeah, it'll be really cool if it can.
If it can. If it doesn't get just, anchored long before it ever gets that far. But in a lot of ways, the technology has already managed to, like a lot of electronic music nowadays is made entirely in computers, whereas in the past it required walls and racks of synthesizers. And now it's possible for like $1,000, or less, even for a lot less, you can do it with free software to make electronic music.
Well, I remember there was this drum and bass producer that was making music on a fucking PSP.
Oh, up in Indy?
Yeah.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
I don't remember his name, but
someone.
Yeah.
He
was making some bangers too,
yeah.
Which is where I'm like, you don't need thousands of dollars worth of equipment anymore, whether fucking digital equipment or physical equipment.
No, not at all.
And it's a lot of it is
but that's the thing, is like it used to require all of this stuff, but it doesn't. And my point is that all of these tools that are truly conceptual, like these things don't have to physically exist. One doesn't need a box to make music. They just need their brain to function in a way to organize it and then translate it somehow. And so now with some size computer, you can do it on a phone. You can make music. Anyone can make music. Whereas the barrier to entry was actually quite large. And so in a lot of ways, the technology is breaking a lot of those barriers down. It's just,
oh, dude, okay. So this is one of the coolest things I've seen for kids that a corporation did in a while. So they made a
Is it that weird toy synthesizer thing? You're
No,
talking
no,
about
no,
that
no.
thing?
So
Oh,
on they had on the back of a cereal box there was piano roll notation, and you could put pieces of cereal on there and use your cell phone to make a beat.
that's
So it
so
would
cool.
be like, yeah, it was really cool in
Like a
terms of
step
like,
sequencer.
yeah, it took the place you put the cereal on the step sequencer on the cereal, and when you used the app on the phone, it would turn it into a beat, and it would have like the little different like lines would have bass, piano, drums, whatever, and you could like program your pattern, and it, like I said, it that is where I look at the potential of technology in terms of like, that's a cool novel little way to introduce a kid into beat making or make writing music, and it's not something you could use forever, but as a introduction is really cool, low tech and high tech at the same time. So I think it like gives kids this notion that it's not dependent upon a certain piece of technology to make the output, which is like ultimately what you want to be
Oh yeah.
presenting in a lot of these cases. Um, so that's where I'm like, it's not dependent upon any specific piece of tech, but we get in these periods where a genre got so defined. Like if you weren't making music in Reason for like a 3 to 5 year window, people weren't going to listen to it in that niche area because they wanted to hear a certain sound,
Oh, they
and
also
anything
probably
that
just wanted to
wasn't.
plug the reason sequence file of program into their computer.
I mean, I'm sure, and they wanted to steal the sounds, which is like part of it, but it really puts this, when that crowd of like tech dependency desire want like controls anything, it puts a cap on anything new that could be presented outside of that tech. And that's where I've seen it happen with like drum and bass specifically, um and then dubstep. uh it was really like, it's really weird to see what you think is a niche uh audience or niche demographic get into mainstream habits and wanting to their shit to have like mainstream qualities of like something that's super consistent across the entire genre, and it ends up being this limiting factor, and I don't know if they realize it, but it happened in a way where I don't think they intended it, but to see it happen in multiple genres of music, like AAA games, same shit happened. Remember when everything had a quick time event? Oh my god.
I hated that.
Oh my god.
That
It
that was
was
like
like everybody decided,
that was the
oh,
worst.
quick time events
That was the
exist. We got to
worst
put in
shit.
everything.
That was like the dumbest period in gaming. Like when
Oh, it
everything
was
had to,
terrible.
when you had
It
when
was fucking terrible.
it's like it's just lazy writing. It's like, oh man, it was great in the Matrix. Let's shove it in our game. It's only cool because
And
they
ever
did it
so
in the
often it
Matrix.
works. Ever so often it works in like God of War, they make it work when you're fighting like some fucking behemoth and you have to mash the buttons, and it like in the heat of the moment, that sort of quick time event works, but the way that they were presented at first, it was just so jarring, and it almost felt like Dragon Quest in terms of like, oh, I'm gonna hit one button and now this 5 second animation is gonna play. Okay, next button, 5 second animation. And it didn't really make use of the tech in a
That's
way.
why I always liked Killer Instinct, because if you could enter the keys in the right order fast enough, you could initiate all these manual combos that would just start chaining and running on and on and on until it ran out. And I guess that only works in that context, but it was like as fast as you could enter, it would start responding. Didn't make you wait.
Well, and that's where it was important to know the combo breakers.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
and
well. If you knew that stuff and you were up against somebody who knew combo breakers and also knew all the moves too, you could have some of the craziest fights, and they would last for a long time because
oh yeah,
if you knew how to block and dodge and break combos, like nobody actually got hurt. It was just these endless fights, and they were incredible. But finding that opponent on Killer Instinct was rare because that game.
well, I don't know if you've had
I keep meaning to
played
buy it
the
when it's
Dragon
on
Ball
Steam,
Z. I think I have a free copy. I may still have one.
Oh, cool.
But there's like the Dragon Ball Z fighting game, and it's like very akin to Killer Instinct in terms of
If you can type
is
that fast, you can do it. Kind
Well,
of stuff, right?
it's like it has these animations that they can chain into each other. So if you don't know a combo breaker, like you may not get to press any buttons once they start chaining shit together. And it's like if you just it can get super frustrating when the computer does it, but if a person's doing it, it's not as bad in terms of like, it's a human doing it.
Yeah.
But when a computer's doing it, it's just fucking infuriating, which is where I'm like, I don't like when a computer can cheat and do some shit. Like a lot of times fighting games specifically will just mimic your moves, and the AI, quote unquote, is just looking at your moves and then countering your moves because it can see them instantly. And like I understand that there are certain ways to go about designing an NPC or designing an enemy AI, but that feels like a really cheap and really just uninspired way of doing it. And they've been doing that shit since like Mortal Kombat. Like Mortal Kombat is one of the quote unquote AIs that it just looks at your fucking input and counters it and it doesn't mirror it. It looks at your input and determines what's the counter that's most likely to interrupt your animation specifically. Which is where that's a really douchey way to program the AI. But so many fighting games do that. There's like, which is also where if you look at fighting game forums and like the way people discuss fighting games and what should be changed, it's a lot about animation timing.
Yeah.
Because like certain animations will have either really short activation times and short animations themselves, or certain ones will be too long, and then the window at the end gives everyone else an opportunity, and then it like can be exploited. So a lot of, especially when we're talking about games that are being played online where lag comes into play, and this is where you see a lot of the discussion of netcode and the rollback, because certain deployments of code make it more difficult for the button presses to activate in perfect real time, or as close to possible. It's not really perfect, but the least lag possible. Whereas if the code's written better, then it's like it's almost like you're playing somebody who's in the same room on the same computer, and the lag is like as minimal as possible. So when we're talking about that scenario, the animation length becomes such a huge factor that when you're playing, like I said, when you're playing against a human opponent, it's not as infuriating as when an AI starts to take advantage of it. And that's where I'm like, it really irritates me as a gamer when developers cut corners on their AI like that. And I'm sure it bugs other people when they encounter it, but they don't necessarily know why. But because I understand game design and understand coding, it makes it even worse because I can see what a computer is doing, but you can't necessarily do anything about it, especially when it's like dependent upon taking advantage of something like an animation cycle or an animation uh, gap that can't, like, the user is like unable to overcome.
Man, I was, you just reminded me, like, I think it was like a decade ago, I was visiting my buddy Ajun out on the East Coast, and we were playing Street Fighter 4 at the time, whichever was the one with the kind of weird space alien chrome looking dude at the end. Anyways, like, we're playing this game and just having fun because it's Street Fighter, and the moves are basically been the same for the last 20 years, and 30 years at this point. And his kid is just mashing buttons, but unleashing the most vicious combos. Like, just it's hilarious. It's like just entertaining as can be. And it occurred to me, like, maybe he's like, his brain is firing fast enough at that point that he was actually seeing those like interpolation gaps, and he was actually like still able to see, but like in front of the game's frame rate itself, because he was doing stuff that was just like impossible.
Yeah, I do think there's some people who can.
And it just reminded me of, like, when I was younger, like, a lot of these games were a lot easier. I know the world is slowing down, but for me, but man, like, watching kids play like games like that where input speed actually still matters. That stuff's so cool. But then again, watching a game where, like, really discrete control entry is actually the name of the game, where just raw intuition itself isn't enough to overcome like actual gameplay requirements. That's also, I mean, it's more fulfilling for me now.
Oh, on that note, so there's this series of videos where experts watch the video game versions of the thing they're experts in.
I've seen one of those with an air fighter pilot.
Yeah, and he watches Ace Combat, and I was interested in terms of,
I've
like,
seen that one.
his critiques were more about what the guy was doing rather than the inaccuracies of the game. There was like one point where he talks about the speed.
Oh yeah, where he says, like,
tracking.
There's one portion where he talks about, like, early on where he says, yeah, the airframe would rip apart if they try to do that.
Right. Yeah.
But then
there's a couple times
but he doesn't mention it much after that, because it's like he's already established it.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing. And then it's like, because the speed they're showing is very incongruous with the speed of the things moving by on the screen. So if they're showing you going at like 2,000 knots, the stuff flying by on the screen is really closer to like 300 knots, and it's not really accurate to how it would be in real life. And that was basically the only other thing I think that wasn't just critiquing how the person was flying. And that's where I was interested in terms of, like, the other videos are like way more, oh, this isn't real, this isn't real, this is not real. And it was like, that wasn't, I was amazed at how little that was present in this assessment. And it just seemed like the dude was like, I don't know if he was trying to be more focused on, it just seemed like because there wasn't much to critique about the realness, then all he was left with was critiquing the guys flying, who I think admittedly wasn't a great player or something. So it was like
Yeah.
the stuff that he was critiquing was like, yeah, this guy shouldn't have been doing that anyway
Well,
because it wasn't
it's
like
not easy
smart.
to become an ace in Ace Combat. You have to like use the gun the whole time basically, and come back with missiles and ordnance. If you can come back with some like ordnance, that means you're like a badass in that game. Like
Well, and
going for
even
all the medals, that stuff takes forever. You gotta grind forever. Ugh. It's still really fulfilling though. You have the fancy planes, right? The Falcon and the other like whatever sixth generation fighters that are available for Ace Combat.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
um, it and looking at other simulators or games, it definitely gets a good uh, representation of like the intricacies of the individual plane. So I see, for something that was made in 2019, I feel like it still holds up really well in terms of uh, being able to compete or compare with stuff that's been made in 2022. And because nothing in 2023 is really like much different than 22. So
I don't
I say
think.
22, like,
Let's see. I think I've read about Ace Combat 8. Like people want it, but from what I understand, the platform isn't going to benefit from anything until next generation hardware exists, and really it's all about developing whatever downloadable content to expand the story universe that exists. Ace Combat, the Skies Unknown story arc is really good, like actually good, because it's they've been developing it for what 20 years now. Shit. When was the first
yeah,
one?
it feels like a
No,
movie.
95. So they've been doing this for 28 years. It's it's like the flagship airplane combat game at this point. Anything else is always going to be compared to Ace Combat, and some games like DCS World will far exceed like the simulator qualities. But when I tried to play DCS World, the story did not compel me to keep playing. Whereas I had to know what happened next in Ace Combat. Like they really get you. They really like make you
I didn't
feel.
even really know there was a story in DCS World. It looks like there's supposed to be, but it didn't really feel like there was one.
That's what I mean. Like I tried and is like I couldn't. Maybe the tutorial just takes so long that I just couldn't break through and make it into the actual game. No, I think that's part of it. Ace Combat series is easy to play and it's easy to get into, and they get you involved enough that you want to know what happens next, and then it's rewarding enough because the difficulty level increases gradually, and the whatever profile the system builds on you and of how you fly your plane and the way that you like to engage targets, and then how it adjusts to make the game more interesting to you. Like they've figured out how to do all of these things. I mean, aside from like spawn locations, the planes don't like whatever you engage doesn't always behave the same way, which is nice.
Yeah, see, that's a great example of like they're not just mimicking what you're doing. And if you get into an air battle in Ace Combat, there's a lot of thinking that has to go on in terms of the way that the AI is constructed. It seems like a pilot making decisions that you're going against rather than
Not just a
something
pilot,
that
a
just.
squadron. You're
I
dealing with a
mean,
trained squadron. Oh man, it's fucking awesome.
but I'm saying in terms
Yeah,
of like whenever you're encountering something, it doesn't just feel like it's reading your input and like responding or countering it. It's like the way that you get immersed in the action. It's because the developers made the algorithms respond in a way that doesn't feel contrived or like it's copying you.
Yeah.
And that's, again, it's just so rare that I think developers take that approach that it stands out. It's super easy to just copy the input. It's too easy to just copy.
Well,
the input.
even if they know the input, you're in a plane several hundred kilometers away. Everyone can see everyone because of radar. So there's only so many ways to react that make sense. And so even if you do change, because no one's going to actually, you're not trying to collide with another plane or crash land or, go kamikaze on something. That's, I mean, I guess you can, but then you got to start over. That's not any fun. And so I think that's part of the gameplay, is that even if it can read your input, it's not going to instruct the AI plane pilot to crash into you. It's going to try and shoot you down. And so there's certain, like, I guess it's adhering to certain laws of physics and also certain self-preservation rules. Like, no one in this on the field actually wants to die. They're trying to survive. And for the NPC on the other side that sees the player as the enemy, their goal is to go home to the barracks and eat their NPC meal and do their NPC routine. None of which we know about because that's not part of our part of the game. But I think that's part of it, is that on some level, these games create fictionalized adversaries that they have just as much of a desire to survive as the player, and that's part of it. And that's what makes it fun. Makes it more. It adds to the I guess the realism of airplane combat, which I have to admit I have absolutely zero experience with in real life. So to me, it's all just a simulation.
Well, very few people do.
Exactly.
Even people who are trained to actually do that shit. Like, it's so rare. I think the highest number of kills by an ace pilot is 15.
And that's real high.
Yeah.
Like in
I think there is this notion of like the way, once again, the propaganda presents this as if like air battles were happening all the fucking time. But
I mean, there was one Red Baron.
But since World War II, I mean, it's not really if you're going to build a fucking airplane for 35 million or whatever the fuck each one costs, you're not going to want to put it in actual battle. You're going to use it for fucking show to try to, intimidate the opponent into backing down, which just seems like exactly what the fuck they did. So it's like, this gets back to the notion of like, on the one hand, $100 million fighter jet sounds cool in theory, but when you actually have to put it in a situation where it's going to potentially be shot down, you're going to think twice.
So an ace is a person who shot down 5 enemy in air-to-air combat, and the last person to do this was in 50 years ago, between May 10 and August 28, 1972, by Captain Steve Ritchie. Richard Ritchie.
Yeah, they're very rare.
That's a long time ago.
There's just not that much fucking air-to-air combat.
Yeah. Eric Hartman, not Cartman. Eric, the most successful fighter pilot of all times with 352 kills, number that will never be surpassed. His nickname Booby.
Never.
Little boy. Yeah. He's also referred to as the Black Devil. Okay, so there is somebody who's more badass than the Red Baron. Yeah, this is post World War I. Let's see.
'Cause I think World War II is like really when they had the most air engagement,
Yeah.
like air to air combat.
Oh yeah, this is a Nazi pilot. He flew a Messerschmitt Bf 109. Huh. He flew 1,404 missions. That's a lot of flying. That's like, if he was up there every day, that's like almost 5 years of flying.
Also, motherfuckers used to lie.
Yeah.
Remember the Ghost of Kiev?
Yeah, well, that was just ace combat. The Red Baron is only attributed to given an attribution of 80 kills in World War One. So
yeah, motherfuckers lying about a bunch of that shit.
hey,
And the Nazis lying on his behalf to make him look better.
It looks like a lot of the aces are all
1,400 missions. My ass.
They're all Nazis. It looks like there's Nazis and Nazis. Oh, Chuck Yeager. He had a total of 11 and a half. Wait, what?
And white people just used to lie about so much shit, and they still do. But like 1,400 fucking bullshit, bull fucking shit.
Wait, these guys are all Nazis. Oh no, here we go. Here's a. No, I'm serious.
I don't trust any fucking Nazi to tell the truth of that.
There's only two. I'm only seen. I'm on number 12. Way. James Doolittle. He's the second American on the list.
You trust Nazis to tell the truth?
And there's a Russian. Man. Look, this list is all Nazis, and the first American is Chuck Yeager, and he has 11 and a half kills. I'm not sure this list can actually be trusted. How do you kill a half a person?
No fucking way.
What does that even mean?
No fucking way, man.
He blew off.
Not to mention, how many of those planes were actually enough to sustain that notion that the Germans shot down all these American planes?
Yeah,
probably, or I mean, maybe British, I guess, but even then, there weren't that many. So, yeah, I don't buy that shit, man. Fucking Nazi liars is what that shit is.
Okay, so America flew a grand total of 2,500 airplanes. So if one dude in World War II shot down over half of those planes, that's definitely bullshit.
Yeah. See, those motherfuckers are liars.
Maybe he shot down he shot down his buddies, and they counted those as planes he shot down because they couldn't tell whose planes were who or whose.
Yeah, that's what that is.
Let's see.
Exaggerating. That's just so, it was so common and so standard until people could check.
Let's see. It looks like there were a lot of planes in the United States had over 320,000 planes in production or completed in production by the end of the war. Russia had 157,000, United Kingdom had 130,000, Germany had 120,000 by the end. So it might actually be reasonable that one person got really lucky and shot down 300 planes. Maybe they got really lucky. They were on the ground firing like anti-aircraft cannons. I don't know though. I'm dubious of these numbers because how did they really track it? How could they actually track this stuff? Especially when
it looks like
all of the history, it just reads like propaganda anyways.
Yeah.
It's like it's the weirdest. It's so strange reading everything pre-World War, pre-1960 something, pre-1960. Everything after that just kind of comes into clarity, it seems. But before that, it just reads like propaganda to me. And when I do find some like dusty tome that contains a record of the darkness of prehistory, it's just it just doesn't. It seems like it couldn't have existed. Yeah. No way. That can't be right. That's too fucked up.
Well, it says the peak size of the Air Force was over 2.4 million in America.
Wow.
And then 80,000 aircraft at like in service at any given time. It's the peak, I think. So,
Man, maybe they were just willing to throw money up into the air and blow it up. Because apparently that's how wars are, when you got to destroy money and resources.
But those weren't like $35 million fighters.
That's true.
Those definitely weren't like. that's way different time. Which is, again, that's why they weren't wanting to actually get the fighter shot down. So
every so often I find myself watching one of those what if scenarios, like what would happen if a modern day fighter squadron encountered like a World War II Japanese battle group.
F-22 costs $143 million per unit.
Yeah, they're definitely not wasting one of those.
F-35A, $70 million per unit.
They're definitely not wasting two of those.
Oh my God. Whew. F-35 costs fucking $42,000 per hour to fly.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think it only costs like $25,000 an hour to fly an F-18 after you get past the initial launch, which costs like $30,000, like getting it off the ground.
Jeez, their operating cost is like between $4 and $7 million per year per unit.
I think I read somewhere that like the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds, like for their air shows, like the cost of just the performance, that whole like 5 minutes or whatever, is like about $80,000. And that's before you actually calculate like just getting to the airfield, like after they take off and then landing. No, I'm serious, because they use a lot of fuel when they're doing all those maneuvers.
Yeah.
They use excessive amounts.
I can only imagine.
And so, I think it's like 4 planes doing really tight maneuvers and dumping fuel so they can just do that crazy. It's beautiful. It's amazing to watch. Like, but they're just, it's just impressive to watch. I don't like how much it costs, though. That kind of sucks. I don't like the idea of that much fuel just being burnt just for the sake of like, hey, check it out, we can do this thing. I'm glad they can do that thing. I'm glad that there's somebody out there who understands how to fly those things like that. That's really super cool. I bet they would be terrifying to be like up against in an actual like dogfight.
I can't. My brain is trying to fathom the notion of like something taking $42,000 per hour to operate. It's just like, are they using money as the fuel and just burning money?
I mean, even a nuclear reactor generates money by operating.
Instead of buying fuel, we just burn the money directly.
Well, that's too easy. Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.